The screaming started 3 months after the Velthani wiped out New Aberdeen. Captain Rains Volkov stood on the bridge of the Retribution's edge, watching the dying planet below rotate in slow, agonized circles. What had once been Velthal, prime seat of their glorious empire, home to 12 billion souls, now resembled a festering wound in space. The planet's surface writhed with unnatural colors, purple and sickly green storms that shouldn't exist on any world with a stable core. Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission from the surface. Communications Officer Hendricks reported, his voice tight with barely suppressed satisfaction. Same as before: mass panic, infrastructure collapse, and he paused, savoring the moment, begging. Volkov's jaw clenched. She remembered another transmission, received from months ago. Admiral Torres screaming over the comm as the colony's ships burn. Men, women, children, 18,000 human souls vaporized by Velthani plasma bombardment while they slept. The aliens had called it a preemptive strike against human expansion. Now it was humanity's turn to strike first. How long until complete planetary collapse? She asked her chief science officer. Dr. Yuki Nakamura consulted her readings, her expression coldly professional. At current decay rates, approximately 72 hours before total core destabilization, the quantum disruptors we introduced into their planetary matrix are exceeding all projections. Volkov nodded. The plan had taken 2 years to develop and another 6 months to implement. While the galaxy debated the New Aberdeen incident in their comfortable council chambers, human engineers had worked in absolute secrecy. They'd reverse-engineered captured Velthani technology, studying their enemy's greatest strength, their ability to manipulate planetary cores for unlimited energy. Humanity had found a way to turn that strength into a weapon of extinction. Captain, Tactical Officer Brennan interrupted. We're detecting massive fleet movements throughout Velthani space. Looks like they're finally mobilizing everything they have. How many? Conservative estimate, 1,500 warships, including their new dreadnoughts. They'll be here within 18 hours. A lesser captain might have felt intimidated. Volkov felt only cold satisfaction. Let them come. Let them witness what humanity did to those who murdered children in their sleep. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All ships are to maintain position around Velthal Prime. No vessel leaves the system alive. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her first officer, stepped beside her. Ma'am, our intelligence suggests they might attempt a mass evacuation of the civilian population. Volkov's eyes remained fixed on the dying world below. What civilians? Webb? I see only the homeworld of a species that showed our families no mercy. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of instruments and the occasional static fill scream from the planet's surface. Every person aboard had lost someone at New Aberdeen. Every human ship in the fleet carried crews motivated by the same burning need for retribution. Ma'am, Nakamura said quietly, I'm detecting some unusual readings from their planetary defense stations. It appears they're trying to reverse our quantum cascade. Can they succeed? Theoretically, no. We've introduced too much chaos into their core matrix, but they might buy themselves an additional few days. Volkov smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. Then we'll just have to accelerate the process, prepare the second wave of disruptors. Through the viewports, Velthal Prime continued its death spiral. Its once majestic cities, built into the planet's crust in harmony with the controlled core energies, now crumbled as geological chaos consumed everything the Velthani had built over millennia. The irony wasn't lost on Volkov. They'd used the aliens' own technology to craft their doom. Humanity had always been quick to adapt, to learn, to weaponize whatever knowledge they acquired. The Velthani had made the mistake of assuming humans would grieve and move on. They'd never understood that humans didn't forgive. They calculated, they planned, they remembered, and when they struck back, they made sure it was with interest compounded. Incoming transmission from the planet's surface, Hendricks announced. It's high command, Mom. They want to surrender. Every eye on the bridge turned to Volkov. She stood motionless for a long moment, then spoke with the finality of a closing. Tomb, tell them we don't accept surrender from dead civilizations. The Velthani fleet dropped out of hyperspace like an avalanche of death and fury. Admiral Keffer commanded from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, a massive dreadnought that had never known defeat. His mandibles clicked with rage as he surveyed the human fleet, barely 200 ships arranged in what appeared to be a defensive formation around his dying homeworld. How many humans? He demanded. Approximately 40,000 personnel across all vessels, his tactical officer reported. Our force represents nearly 300,000 of the finest warriors in Velth Annie space. Kethver's secondary arms flexed with anticipation. The humans had somehow poisoned his world's core, committing an act of terrorism that would echo through the ages. But they would pay for their atrocity with blood and screaming. All ships. Attack formation Keftel. Destroy every human vessel. Take no prisoners. The Velth Annie armada surged forward, their crystalline hulls gleaming with deadly intent. Aboard the Retribution's edge, Captain Volkov watched the enemy approach with the patience of a spider feeling vibrations in her web. They're coming in fast and aggressive, Webb observed. Classic Velth Annie shock assault. Good, Volkov replied. Aggressive enemies make predictable enemies. Signal all ships execute Protocol Lazarus. Across the human fleet, ships that had appeared to be standard destroyers and cruisers began to unfold. Hidden weapon ports open, revealing armaments that shouldn't exist on vessels of their size. Stealth corvettes, invisible to Velth Annie sensors, materialized throughout their formation. But the most dramatic transformation occurred within the human ships themselves. Neural interface synchronization complete, Dr. Nakamura announced. All crew members are now linked to their vessel's combat systems. This was humanity's darkest innovation, born from studying captured Velth Annie biotechnology. Human nervous systems, temporarily enhanced and networked, could process battlefield information and react to threats faster than any conventional crew. The cost was severe neural burning, permanent brain damage, even death, but every volunteer knew what they'd signed up for. They'd all lost someone at New Aberdeen. The first exchange of fire lit up the void like a newborn star. Velth Annie plasma beams, capable of vaporizing asteroids, struck human ships with devastating effect. The destroyer Vengeance took a direct hit to its engine compartment, exploded in a ball of superheated gas, taking 300 souls with it. The cruiser Justice Denied lost its forward section to concentrated fire. Its crew compartments opened to vacuum, but the humans struck back with weapons the Velth Annie had never encountered. Quantum torpedoes inspired by the same technology, destroying. Velthal Prime phased through enemy shields and detonated within ship hulls. The Velth Annie heavy cruiser Storm of Victory simply ceased to exist, as its internal structure was torn apart at the molecular level. Neural burn casualties on decks 5 through 7. Dr. Nakamura reported, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained her own neural link. We're losing people to system overload. Acceptable losses. Volkov replied coldly, her consciousness partially merged with the ship's targeting systems. Through electronic eyes, she could see the battle with inhuman clarity, every trajectory, every weak point, every opportunity for destruction. The human stealth corvettes struck from unexpected angles, their crews dying from neural feedback as they pushed their enhanced reflexes beyond biological limits. But before they died, they took Velth Annie ships with them. The corvette Widow's Bite rammed itself into the side of a Velth Annie dreadnought, its crew already dead from neural burning. The explosion tore a hole in the enemy vessel large enough to fly a shuttle through. They're learning our tactics, Webb warned, blood trickling from his nose as his own neural interface strained under combat stress. Adapting their formations, Admiral Kethver snarled as he watched his forces take unexpected casualties. These humans fought like madmen, sacrificing themselves without hesitation. Their weapons were strange, their tactics suicidal, but effective. Focus. Fire on their command ship, he ordered. Kill their leadership, and they'll scatter. 20 Velth Annie warships concentrated their fire on the Retribution's edge. Plasma beams and particle cannons converged on Volkov's ship like the fingers of an angry god. The human vessel shields failed within seconds. Armor plating vaporized. Internal explosions rocked the ship as power conduits overloaded. Hull breach on decks 1 through 4. Hendricks screamed over the alarms. We're losing atmosphere, but Volkov remained standing, her neural interface burning pathways through her brain as she maintained connection with the fleet. Through her sacrificed consciousness, every human ship moved with perfect coordination. Ma'am, you need to disconnect, Dr. Nakamura shouted. The neural load is killing you. Volkov's response came through blood-flecked lips. Let it burn. Make them pay. The Retribution's edge was dying, but it took for Velth Annie's ships with it, as explosion after explosion ripped through the human flagship. Its quantum torpedoes found their marks with inhuman precision. Admiral Keffer watched in horror as his forces were systematically dismantled by an enemy That seemed to welcome death. The humans weren't just fighting, they were conducting a symphony of mutual destruction, trading their lives for maximum enemy casualties. As the first phase of battle ended, nearly a third of both fleets had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and frozen corpses, but the humans were smiling as they died. Captain Volkov's consciousness flickered between life and electronic death, as emergency systems fought to keep her neural interface from completely burning out her brain. Around her, the bridge of the Retribution's edge resembled a slaughterhouse. Half her crew lay unconscious, or worse, from neural feedback, blood seeping from their eyes and ears. "Transfer command to the Absolute Zero," she whispered to Webb, who was barely conscious himself. "Tell Captain Rodriguez, the plan continues." Below them, Velthal Prime writhed in its death throes. The planet's surface had begun to crack along massive fault lines, revealing the hellish glow of its destabilizing core. The quantum disruptors were working even better than projected. The world would be completely uninhabitable within 48 hours. Admiral Keffer felt something he'd never experienced in 3 centuries of warfare. True desperation. Half his fleet was gone, destroyed by these suicidal humans and their impossible weapons. Worse, his homeworld was dying, and his scientists had confirmed what he feared most: the process was irreversible. "Admiral," his communications officer reported with trembling mandibles, "we're receiving evacuation requests from every major population center. 12 billion civilians are requesting immediate transport off-world." Keffer, as for eyes focused on the tactical display, his remaining fleet could evacuate perhaps 50 million beings before the planet's final collapse. The mathematics of extinction stared back at him with cruel clarity. "Begin immediate evacuation of essential personnel. Only government officials, military commanders, genetic archives, and cultural preservers," he ordered. "All other requests are regrettably denied." His officers stared at him in horror. They were discussing the abandonment of their entire civilization to save a chosen few. Aboard the Absolute Zero, Captain Elena Rodriguez assumed command of the human fleet with the same cold fury that had driven them across the galaxy. She lost her daughter at New Aberdeen, a 5-year-old girl named Sophia, who'd never see another sunrise because the Velthani had decided humans were expanding too quickly. "Status report," she demanded through gritted teeth, her own neural interface burning pathways through her mind. 47 ships remaining operational, her tactical officer reported. "Enemy fleet down to approximately 700 vessels, but they're pulling back to form a protective barrier around evacuation transports." Rodriguez smiled grimly. The Velthani were trying to save their people. How admirably naive. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Begin phase 2. Absolute interdiction. Nothing leaves the system alive." The human fleet began to move with deadly purpose. Ships that had appeared crippled suddenly revealed hidden weapons and propulsion systems. The Absolute Zero itself underwent a transformation that would have been impossible with conventional technology. Its hull opened like metallic flower petals to reveal a weapon that shouldn't exist, targeting the evacuation transports. Her weapons officer announced, "Ma'am, sensors indicate approximately 2 million civilians aboard those vessels." Rodriguez thought of Sophia's laugh, silenced forever by Velthani preemptive action. Fire. The quantum lance beam struck the largest evacuation transport, a vessel designed to carry refugees, not withstand military-grade weapons. The ship simply vanished, taking the 100,000 Velthani civilians into instant oblivion. Admiral Keffer watched in disbelief as the humans systematically targeted evacuation vessels. This wasn't warfare, it was genocide. "They're killing refugees," his tactical officer screamed. "Unarmed civilians, return fire," Keffer roared. "Protect the transports." But the human ships moved like vengeful spirits, their crews dying from neural overload as they pushed their enhanced reflexes beyond biological limits. Every human vessel was now effectively a guided missile piloted by the living dead. The destroyer Sophia's Revenge rammed directly into an evacuation transport, its captain's final transmission echoing across all frequencies. "This is for the children you murdered." The explosion took out 3 more refugee ships caught in the blast radius. Dr. Nakamura, still barely conscious aboard the dying Retribution's edge, watched the systematic slaughter through the fleet's shared consciousness. Part of her, the part that remembered her oath to preserve life, recoiled in horror. But the larger part, the part that had identified child children's bodies in New Aberdeen's ruins, felt only satisfaction. "Ma'am," her assistant reported, The planet's core destabilization is accelerating. The evacuation fleet will never clear the system in time. Rodriguez's response was delivered with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Then, they'll die with their world. The battle became a running engagement, as Velth-Any warships desperately tried to screen their evacuation transports, while human vessels hunted them through the outer system. Every exchange left both sides bloodied, but the humans fought with the fury of the already damned. The cruiser New Aberdeen's wrath took on for Velth-Any destroyers simultaneously, its crew dying one by one from neural burnout as they maintained impossible firing solutions. When the ship finally exploded, it took the enemy vessels with it. On Velthal Prime's surface, massive cities began to collapse as the planet's gravity became unstable. 12 billion beings looked up at their sky and saw evacuation ships burning like falling stars, knowing their civilization was ending not with conquest, but with abandonment. Admiral Keffer felt the weight of species extinction settling on his shoulders. These humans weren't content with victory, they wanted erasure, complete and total annihilation of everything the Velth-Any had ever built or dreamed. Admiral, his science officer reported with trembling voice, the humans appear to be using our own evacuation vessels as bait. They're herding our warships into kill zones. Keffer's mandibles clicked with desperate rage. The humans had learned their tactics, studied their psychology, and crafted a campaign designed not just to defeat the Velth-Any, but to make them suffer the complete destruction of hope. As another evacuation transport exploded under human fire, carrying 300,000 civilians into the void, Keffer finally understood what he faced. These weren't soldiers. They were the instruments of divine retribution, piloted by the ghosts of murdered children. Admiral Keffer made the decision that would haunt him through whatever remained of his life. He ordered his warships to use the evacuation transports as shields. All military vessels formed offensive formations around civilian craft. He commanded, his voice hollow with the weight of moral compromise, use their hulls to absorb human fire. His officers stared in horror. They were discussing using their own people as human shields, a violation of every principle their civilization had held sacred for millennia. Admiral, his second-in-command, whispered, "This is unprecedented. Our own civilians are already dead if we don't reach the hyperspace jump point." Keffer finished coldly. 2 million refugees behind our battle line, or 12 billion corpses on a dead world. Do the mathematics. Captain Rodriguez watched the Velth-Any formation shift and felt a moment of genuine respect for her enemy. They were learning, adapting, making the hard choices that warfare demanded. It wouldn't save them, but it showed they understood what they faced. They're putting their civilians between us and them. Her tactical officer reported, smart move, makes targeting their warships significantly more difficult. Rodriguez's daughter had been 5 years old when the Velth-Any plasma bombardment turned her into ash and memory. The same age as many of the young beings aboard those refugee transports. Launch all remaining quantum torpedoes, she ordered. Set them for phase variance. They'll punch through the transport hulls and detonate inside the warships behind them. Her weapons officer, a young man named Patterson, whose wife had died at New Aberdeen, hesitated for just a moment. "Ma'am, the civilian casualties are acceptable," Rodriguez finished. "Fire." 37 quantum torpedoes phased through the evacuation transports like they were made of paper. The refugee ships themselves remained intact, their hulls undamaged by weapons designed to ignore physical matter. But the warships using them as shields weren't so fortunate. The torpedoes materialized inside Velth-Any military vessels and detonated with the fury of dying stars. 7 warships exploded simultaneously, their destruction sending debris cascading through the evacuation fleet. The transport Hope of Velthal was struck by a piece of hull plating, traveling at 17,000 kilometers per second. The massive refugee ship broke apart like a child's toy, spilling 230,000 civilians into the void. Admiral Keffer watched his people die and felt something break inside his soul. The humans had found a way to kill his warriors while using his own tactics against him. Every defensive decision he made resulted in more civilian deaths. Incoming transmission from the surface, his communications officer announced. The Planetary Council they're requesting immediate orbital bombardment of all major population centers. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of dying electronics and the distant explosions of human weapons. Finding their marks, they want us to kill our own people? Keffer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They're saying, there. saying a quick death is preferable to what's happening on the surface. The core destabilization is causing gravity fluctuations, tectonic collapse, atmospheric ignition. 12 billion beings are dying slowly, and they're begging us to make it fast. Dr. Nakamura, still connected to the human fleet's shared consciousness despite her dying brain, felt the weight of species genocide settling on her shoulders. Through electronic eyes, she watched Velth anti-evacuation ships struggling to reach the hyperspace jump point. While human vessels hunted them like wolves pursuing wounded deer, Captain Rodriguez, she transmitted through the neural link, were receiving massive energy readings from the planet's surface. It appears the Velthani are, they're firing on their own cities. Rodriguez watched as orbital defense platforms, designed to protect Velthal Prime from invasion, turned their weapons downward. Plasma beams that could destroy asteroids began systematically vaporizing population centers, each strike mercifully ending the suffering of millions. They're giving their people quick deaths, she observed with something approaching respect. Rather than let them die slowly from core collapse, the irony wasn't lost on her. The Velthani had shown New Aberdeen's colonists no such mercy. 18,000 humans had burned alive in their sleep, given no choice between slow death and quick oblivion. Continue the pursuit, she ordered. All evacuation vessels are still valid targets. The human fleet pressed their attack with mechanical precision. Ships that should have been destroyed hours ago continued fighting through sheer force of will and neural interface enhancement. The destroyer, Remember Aberdeen, had lost its entire port side to enemy fire, while its dying crew maintained weapons locked on a Velthani cruiser, until both ships vanished in mutual annihilation. Aboard the evacuation transport Last Dream of Home, 300,000 Velthani civilians watched through viewports as their homeworld burned. The planet they'd known since birth was being systematically destroyed by their own military, a mercy killing on a global scale. Young Melvara, barely past her first molting, pressed her face against the transparent aluminum and whispered to her mother, "Why are they doing this to us?" Her mother, elder historian Neska, had no answer. She'd studied human psychology, analyzed their colonial expansion patterns, even written papers on their potential as galactic neighbors. Nothing in her research had suggested they were capable of such calculated, systematic revenge. "I don't know, little one," she whispered back, her secondary arms wrapping protectively round her daughter. "I don't know." The transport shuddered as human weapons fired past nearby, hunting for the warships that should have been protecting them, but instead were using them as disposable cover. Admiral Keffer received the final transmission from Velthal Prime, just as the planet's core achieved critical instability. The voice belonged to High Counselor Werdash, the closest thing their species had to a supreme leader. "Admiral, in the name of all who have lived and died on this world, I absolve you of any responsibility for what follows. You cannot save us all. Save who you can." The transmission cut to static as Velthal Prime's core finally collapsed. The explosion was visible from 3-star systems away. 12 billion years of geological evolution, 4,000,000 years of Velthani civilization, and the dreams of 12 billion souls vanished in a flash of nuclear fire that briefly outshone. There, Sun-Doc Captain Rodriguez watched their target world die and felt empty. The revenge was complete, the debt paid in full. But Sophia was still dead, and now so was an entire civilization. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, "the surviving evacuation vessels are attempting to jump to hyperspace." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display. 43 refugee transports remained, carrying perhaps 3 million Velthani survivors, the last remnants of their species. For a moment, she hesitated. Was this justice or genocide? Vengeance or atrocity? Then she remembered finding Sophia's charred teddy bear in the ruins of New Aberdeen. "Pursue and destroy," she ordered. "Let none escape to carry word of what happened here." The hunt began in earnest. The hyperspace jump point lay 12 million kilometers away, a distance that might as well have been 12 light years as human ships closed in for the final slaughter. Admiral Keffer commanded a fleet of 318 warships, protecting 43 evacuation transports carrying the last 3 million souls of his civilization. Iron. Behind them, where Velthal Prime had once been, only an expanding sphere of radioactive debris marked the grave of 12 billion beings. All ships maintain defensive screen around the evacuation fleet, he ordered. "We need 17 minutes to reach minimum jump distance. 17 minutes to save his species from extinction." Captain Rodriguez commanded 31 human ships, their hulls scarred by battle, their crews dying from neural interface overload. But they moved with the precision of a single organism. Guided by the shared consciousness of the already damned, signal all vessels. She commanded through bleeding lips, final engagement protocol. No survivors, no retreat, no mercy. The human ships accelerated toward the Velth-Annie fleet like bullets, fired from the grave of New Aberdeen. The collision of the two forces created a battlefield that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Plasma beams crossed the void like deadly aurora. Quantum torpedoes phased through reality itself, and particle cannons carved bright lines of destruction through the darkness. Aboard the evacuation transport echoes of home, elder historian Neska held her daughter, close as explosions lit the viewport like angry stars. Around them, 300,000 refugees, the last poets, scientists, artists, and dreamers of their species prayed to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. Mama, little Melvara whispered, "Are we going to die?" Neska looked out at the battle raging around their fragile transport and saw human ships ramming directly into Velth-Annie warships, their crews choosing death over failure. She'd spent her life studying the gentler aspects of human culture, their poetry, their music, their capacity for love and compassion. She'd never imagined they could be this ruthless. "I don't know, little one," she whispered, "but if we do, we'll be together." The Velth-Annie heavy cruiser Storm of Ancient Fury took on 3 human destroyers simultaneously. Captain Heshwar had commanded warships for 2 centuries, but he'd never faced an enemy like this. The human vessels fought with suicidal precision, their crews pushing their enhanced nervous systems beyond biological limits. The destroyer Sophia's Vengeance rammed straight into his port bow, its captain screaming a single word over all frequencies. "Remember," the explosion tore through both ships. But Heshwar's crew managed to eject the core before it could breach containment. As his ship died around him, he watched the human destroyer's wreckage spiral into an evacuation transport. 370,000 civilians died in the resulting collision. Dr. Nakamura felt her consciousness fragmenting as her neural interface finally reached critical overload. Through the shared network, she experienced the deaths of every human crew member. Patterson on the Justice burned. As plasma fire consumed his bridge, Commander Torres aboard the Never Forget as her ship's hull cracked like an eggshell, but she also felt their satisfaction. Each human death was taking multiple Velth-Annie ships with it. "Neural cascade failure in progress," she reported to Captain Rodriguez, blood streaming from her eyes. "I'm losing connection to 40% of the fleet." "Maintain link as long as possible," Rodriguez ordered, her own brain cooking inside. Her skull from interface feedback. "We need coordination for the final push." The human battle line collapsed into something that barely resembled organized warfare. Individual ships, their crews half dead from neural burning, launched suicide attacks on whatever targets they could reach. The cruiser Aberdeen's Wrath had lost life support, navigation, and weapons control. Captain Mills, the only surviving officer on the bridge, manually programmed a collision course with the evacuation transport Last Hope of Tomorrow. As his ship accelerated toward the refugee vessel, he thought of his son Thomas, 7 years old, when the Velth-Annie plasma bombardment had turned him into vapor and memory. "This is for every child you murdered," he whispered as his ship struck the transport amidships. 400,000 Velth-Annie civilians died in the explosion. Admiral Keffer watched his species dying and made a decision that would define his legacy forever. With 8 minutes left until they reached the jump point, and evacuation transports being destroyed faster than his warships could protect them, he ordered the unthinkable. "All military vessels, implement protocol final honor." He commanded, "Use yourselves as shields." His officers stared in horror as the implications sank in. He was ordering every warship to position itself between the humans and the evacuation fleet, ensuring the military's total destruction in exchange for civilian survival. "Admiral," his tactical officer protested, That's the entire Velth-Annie fleet. Every ship, every crew would be a worthy sacrifice to preserve our species." Keffer finished. "Execute immediately." 318 Velth-Annie warships moved into a perfect sphere around the remaining evacuation transports. Their hulls turned outward like the petals of some deadly flower. Every crew knew they were flying toward certain death, but they did it anyway. Captain Rodriguez watched the enemy formation shift and felt a moment of grudging admiration. The Velth-Annie were sacrificing their entire military to save their civilians, exactly what the humans would have done at New Aberdeen. If they'd been given the chance, they're making a final stand, her tactical officer observed. Impressive discipline. Rodriguez thought of the 18,000 humans who died without the chance to make any stand at all. Signal all ships, she ordered. Concentrate all remaining firepower on the evacuation vessels. Phase through their warship screen directly. The quantum torpedoes launched by dying human crews phased through Velth any holes, like they were made of mist. But instead of detonating inside warships, they materialized within the evacuation transports themselves. Elder historian Nesca felt the transport echoes of home shudder as something impossible manifested in the cargo bay behind her. She had just enough time to pull her daughter close before the quantum torpedo detonated. 300,000 civilians, including the last keeper of Velth cultural memory, became expanding plasma in the space between heartbeats. Admiral Keffer watched 18 more evacuation transports vanish in simultaneous explosions and felt his soul break completely. The humans had found a way to kill refugees while leaving their warship protection intact, rendering his sacrifice meaningless. Time to jump point, he asked, his voice hollow with despair. For minutes, Admiral, 25 evacuation transports remained, carrying perhaps 2 million souls, all that would survive of a civilization that had spanned 3 galaxies. Captain Rodriguez commanded 7 functional human ships, their crews more dead than alive from neural interface overload, but they were close enough now to see individual Velth vessels with the naked eye. Final torpedo salvo, she ordered. Every remaining weapon. 4 to 7 quantum torpedoes phased through reality itself, seeking the hearts of evacuation transports that carried children who would never grow up, artists who would never create, and lovers who would never meet. The weapons detonated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction of explosions that lit up the entire battle space like a newborn sun. When the light faded, only 7 evacuation transports remained, 7 ships carrying the final 700,000 members of a species that had once dreamed of touching the stars. Admiral Keffer stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. His crew was dead, killed by human quantum weapons that had phased through their hull and detonated in the command center. Around him, the ship's systems failed one by one, sparking and smoking in the recycled air that tasted of death and defeat. 7 evacuation transports remained, 7 fragile vessels, carrying the absolute final remnants of Velth civilization. In 90 seconds, they would reach the hyperspace jump point and scatter to distant galaxies, carrying word of what humanity had done here, if they lived that long. Captain Rodriguez commanded 3 human ships, their hulls held together by emergency force fields and the sheer will of dying crews. The neural interfaces had burned out most of her people's minds, leaving them functionally brain dead, but still capable of following simple commands. Through muscle memory and hate, final approach, she whispered through lips that no longer moved properly, her own nervous system shutting down from interface overload. All ships, ramming speed, the 3 human vessels Sophia's Vengeance, Never Forget, and Aberdeen's final gift accelerated toward the Velth evacuation fleet like guided missiles, fired from the grave of a murdered colony, aboard the transport. Last breath of tomorrow. Elder Counselor Mercathal gathered the surviving children around him in the central cargo bay. 3,000 young Velthani, orphaned by a war they'd never understood, looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much death. Tell us the story again, whispered Yelkara, barely past her first molting, about the time before the humans came. Mercathal's voice shook as he began the ancient tale of Velthal Prime in its glory days, when 12 billion souls had lived in harmony with their planet's controlled core energies. He spoke of crystal cities that sang in the stellar wind, of vast libraries that held the accumulated wisdom of millennia, of children playing in gardens beneath alien suns. All of it gone now, all of it reduced to radioactive ash and the revenge fantasies of a species that refused to forgive. 60 seconds to jump point, the transport's captain announced over the intercom. All passengers, prepare for hyperspace transition. But Admiral Keffer, dying alone on his shattered flagship, had made a final decision. He'd failed to protect his people, failed to save his civilization, failed at everything that mattered, but he could still deny the humans their complete victory. With hands that trembled from radiation poisoning, he activated the Eternal Dominion self-destruct sequence. If my species dies here, he whispered to the empty bridge, then so do you. The flagships matter, antimatter containment began its catastrophic failure, building toward an explosion that would vaporize everything within 10 million kilometers, including the evacuation transports he'd sworn to protect. Captain Rodriguez felt the enemy flagship's energy spike through her dying neural interface and understood immediately what was happening. The Velthani admiral was choosing mutual annihilation over allowing any survivors to escape. And tell the galaxy what had happened here. Clever bastard, she whispered, respect and fury warring in her dying mind. He's going to take everyone with him. The math was brutally simple. The Eternal Dominion's antimatter explosion would occur in 43 seconds. The evacuation transports would reach jump distance in 37 seconds. The expanding sphere of annihilation would catch them 6 seconds after they achieved hyperspace capability. So close to escape, so close to carrying their species' memory to distant stars. Rodriguez made her own final decision. All ships, emergency power to engines, she commanded, intercept course with the enemy flagship. We ram him before he can detonate. Her surviving crew Patterson with his burned-out eyes. Dr. Nakamura with blood streaming from her neural interface. Ports. Communications Officer Hendricks speaking in tongues as his mind collapsed responded with the mechanical precision of the already dead. The 3 human ships accelerated toward the Eternal Dominion at maximum burn, their crews pushing. Dying engines beyond all safety parameters. Hull plating began to peel away from the Sophia's vengeance as it exceeded its structural limits. The Never Forget lost its port nacelle in a cascade of sparks and flame, but continued on its collision course. Admiral Keffer watched the human ships approaching and felt something like peace settle over his soul. They understood. These terrible, beautiful, vengeful creatures understood that some things were worth dying for. 30 seconds to detonation, his ship's computer announced. In its maddeningly calm voice, through his flagship's sensors, he could see the evacuation transports racing toward the jump point. 700,000 souls, poets and engineers, children and elders. The last genetic diversity of his species, all depending on his sacrifice. To give them those crucial extra seconds needed for escape, the human ship Sophia's vengeance struck his flagship's forward hull at 17,000 kilometers per second. The impact created a localized gravity well that lasted for 0.003 seconds. Before the laws of physics reasserted themselves, both ships ceased to exist as recognizable matter. Their constituent atoms scattered across millions of cubic kilometers of space in an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. But the collision disrupted the Eternal Dominion's antimatter containment sequence, turning what should have been a controlled detonation into a chaotic energy release that spent itself harmlessly in the void. Jump point achieved, screamed the captain of the transport last breath of tomorrow as his ship's hyperspace engines engaged. All vessels, execute emergency jump. 7 evacuation transports vanished into hyperspace, carrying the final remnants of Velthani civilization to safety among distant stars. Captain Rodriguez, her consciousness scattered across the debris field that had once been her ship, felt a moment of perfect clarity in her dying thoughts. They'd failed. 700,000 Velthani had escaped to carry word of humanity's revenge across the galaxy. But as her neural patterns finally collapsed and her awareness faded into eternal darkness, she realized she no longer cared. Sophia was still dead. New Aberdeen was still ash. And somewhere in the expanding wreckage of 2 fleets, justice and vengeance had become indistinguishable from each other. The battle was over. Both sides had lost everything that mattered. In the silence that followed, only the dead bore witness to what they'd accomplished. 6 months later, the Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. Representatives from 400 species filled the vast amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, electromagnetic pulses, and traditional speech that the universal translator struggled to process. But everyone understood the central question that had brought them together: what to do about humanity. Elder Counselor Mercathal stood at the center of the chamber, one of only 700,000 Velthani left in the universe. His secondary arms trembled as he activated the holographic display that showed the Velthal system, or what remained of it. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber through quantum resonance. 6 months ago, my homeworld contained 12 billion souls. Today, that world no longer exists. The hologram showed the expanding debris field that had once been Velthal Prime. Its radioactive remains still glowing with the fury of a destabilized planetary core. Scattered throughout the wreckage were the skeletal remains of two fleets that had fought each other to mutual extinction. The humans, Mercathal continued, deployed weapons we had never encountered, quantum disruptors that turn our planet's own energy systems against us. They systematically hunted down our evacuation fleet, targeting civilian transports with the same ruthlessness they showed our military vessels. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. The Velthani had been one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations, respected throughout the galaxy for their technological achievements and cultural contributions. Their near extinction sent a clear message: no species was safe from human vengeance. Ambassador Krex High of the stellar Conquer Dot, a crystalline being whose faceted form refracted light in complex patterns, spoke first. The destruction of civilian targets is a violation of the most fundamental laws of interstellar warfare. We demand an immediate investigation and criminal proceedings against the surviving human colonial government. There are no surviving humans from that fleet, Mercathal replied quietly. They fought until every ship was destroyed, every crew member dead. Their entire force was consumed by their need for revenge. But their colonial government, another delegate began, has disavowed all knowledge of the operation, interrupted Council Arbiter Voss Helen, the Chamber's presiding officer. According to their official statement, the fleet that destroyed Velthal Prime was composed entirely of rogue elements, acting without government authorization. The lie was transparent, but legally unassailable. Humanity's colonial administration had created perfect deniability by allowing the revenge fleet to operate independently, cutting all official ties before the operation began. In the observation gallery, Dr. James Chen, one of New Aberdeen's few survivors, watched the proceedings with hollow eyes. He lost his wife and two sons in the Velthani attack, but unlike the crews of the revenge fleet, he'd chosen to live with his grief rather than die for it. Now he wondered if they'd been the wiser choice. The question before us, Arbiter Voss Helen continued, is not whether humanity committed an atrocity. They clearly did. The question is what our response should be. The Zellan delegate, a gaseous being contained within an environmental suit, pulsed with agitated colors. Economic sanctions, cut off all trade relationships, isolate them until they learn civilized behavior, and accomplish what? Asked the Threnary representative, her insectoid features clicking with skepticism. The humans who did this are already dead. Their government has officially condemned the action. You would punish an entire species for the crimes of a revenge mafia, a few. Mercathal's voice carried a note of bitter amusement. 200 ships, 40,000 personnel, all volunteers who had lost family at New Aberdeen. This wasn't the action of a few extremists. It was a coordinated effort of an entire culture that values vengeance above mercy. The Aquatic Coalition's representative spoke through her translation device, her words carrying the deep resonance of her oceanic homeworld. Perhaps we should consider why they were motivated to such extremes. The Velthani attack on New Aberdeen was unprovoked, targeting sleeping civilians. One could argue that humanity's response, while excessive, was understandable. Mercathal's mandibles clicked with outrage. They murdered 12 billion civilians. They destroyed our homeworld. They hunted down refugee transports, carrying children, after you murdered 18,000 of theirs. The aquatic representative replied calmly, including children who never threatened anyone. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of competing voices, species taking sides based on their own relationships with both humans and Velthani. Some called for complete ostracism of humanity from galactic civilization, others argued for understanding and reconciliation, but in the end, the mathematics of realpolitik won out. Humanity controlled 17 colonial worlds, possessed advanced military technology, and had just demonstrated their willingness to commit species-level genocide in pursuit of revenge. Regardless of the moral implications, they were too dangerous to antagonize and too useful as allies to completely alienate. The final resolution, passed by a narrow margin, imposed limited economic sanctions on human space while officially condemning both the New Aberdeen attack and the Velthal Prime response as mutual atrocities that demonstrate the need for better interspecies communication. In other words, both sides were wrong, but both were too powerful to meaningfully punish. Mercathal listened to the final vote with the resignation of someone who had witnessed the death of hope itself. As he prepared to leave the chamber, Dr. Chen approached him from the observation gallery. Elder Counselor, the human said quietly, I wanted to express my personal condolences for your loss. What happened to your people? It wasn't justice. It was revenge, and revenge is never satisfied. Mercathal studied the human for a long moment. This one had lost family too, but had chosen a different path. Do you believe your species will learn from this? He asked. Chen was quiet for a long time before answering. I hope so. What if someone attacks our colonies again? He shrugged. Helplessly, we remember everything, Elder Counselor, every slight, every injustice, every child who dies because of someone else's decision. It's our greatest strength and our most terrible weakness. 6 months later, the first Velthani Memorial Garden was established on the human world of New Olympia. It contained soil from all 7 surviving Velthani refugee worlds, tended by human volunteers who had lost family at New Aberdeen. The inscription, written in both languages, reads simply, Here lie the dreams of 2 species who forgot that children should never pay the price for their parents' wars. But in the Outer Rim, human colonial surveys continued to expand into previously uncharted space. And in the hidden archives of Colonial Defense Command, detailed files were being compiled on every species that had voted against humanity. In the Galactic Council, because humans remembered everything, and in a galaxy where memory was the longest, poison, forgiveness was the rarest gift. The Velthal system remained a monument to the mathematics of vengeance, an expanding cloud of radioactive debris that would glow for 10,000 years, reminding anyone who passed by that some debts could only be paid in blood. Both species had gotten exactly what they deserved, and neither would ever be the same again.